Hi, welcome to my wrap-up for February. Let's see how my reading month went. So on my reading journal spreads, I have my opening page here with a quote. In the winter, she curls up around a good book and dreams away the cold. Ben Aaronovitch. This is very much Remy and me, my cat Remy. Oh my goodness. I love that picture. I found it on Pinterest, same with the quote. So I don't know the artist of who to credit, but I really do like that picture. Over here on this side, we have my calendar. I mark when I read books. So like the start date and the end date, make little bars. I spent almost 2 weeks on Quicksilver by Callie, Hart, which was perfectly fine by me because I liked that book. So let's go ahead and dive in to see what the books were that I read this month. So I read 8 books this month. The Sleeper and the Spindle by Neil Gaiman. The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy. The Lost Words by Robert McCanyon, I believe. Jacqueline Woodson's Red at the Bone. Quicksilver by Callie, Hart. Mapping the Interior by Stephen Graham Jones. The Sinners All Bow by Kate Winkler Dawson. And Queen of the Cicadas by V. Castro. So I had quite a few different genres this month. If we look over at the book stats side, we can see that under genres, I had 1 fairy tale, 1 fantasy, 3 historical books, 1 horror, and 2 poetries. Again, I mostly stayed in adult books with 5, but I did have 2 children's books. Total pages read, 1,703. Total minutes listened, 2,620. And the reason I list both is because I jump between audio and physical reading. So I always, and a lot of times I will immersive read, so I will have the audiobook playing while I follow along in my book. So it makes sense to count both. My ratings, I had mostly 3 stars this month. I had no 5 stars. I had no outstanding reads that jumped out at me. But those were my book stats, and in the years published, I stayed pretty much in the 21st century. So let's take a look at the reviews. So my book of the month, drumroll, was Quicksilver by Callie, Hart. I gave it a 2-page spread because I had a lot to say. And I really wanted to put some pictures and things. So the pictures that I went with, again, are from Pinterest, but this is the main character. So this is Fisher, and this is Saris, and that's her little white fox, Onyx. Then over on this side, I've got Carrion Swift, which was one of the characters from Saris's life, and so he's on this side. That's kind of what I think he'd look like. And then over on this side, we have Renfis, and we have, I'm going to say his name wrong, Lorathis. I totally said that wrong. But those are the general and Fisher's besties. So I put them in there, and that's kind of what I think they would look like. So of course, book of the month, I have the seal. I put the sticker on my book of the month. I have a couple of quotes. So this one is kind of the toast that they give Saris after her first battle. Fisher says, "Be unrelenting and unmerciful in the face of the wicked dead." And then Renfis, he replies, "And if you should find soul sundered from flesh, order a drink for us at the first tavern you come across in the afterlife. We'll settle the tab when we get there." I love that. That's so such a warrior thing to say. I loved it. I really enjoyed this book. Now this book gets mixed ratings on Book Talk and GoodReads reviews and BookTube and Bookstagram or whatever, all of the books on social media. You either really love this book or you absolutely hate it and don't finish it. I fell into the camp of I really like this book and I wish it would go on and on and on. Could it have used an editor and like, did it really need to be almost 700 pages? No. But I enjoyed the characters so much, like I didn't care. I didn't care that we were having another dinner scene or that we were just at the forge beating metal. I did not care. Like I loved these characters. I really wanted to be in their group. I wanted to fight vampires with them. I was so into this book. Like, this was a really good book. It hit everything that I look for in a good story. And it had just enough romance. Like, it was a lot of, gosh, what could I compare it to? I felt at times that it was a bit like Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, with all the battles and wars and stuff. And then at other times, it was kind of like, oh God, like, Princess Bride-ish, I would say. Kind of Princess Bride-ish, kind of, yeah, in that element of being like in a fantasy, royalty and princesses and stuff like that. That kind of Princess Bridey. There were some comedic, funny moments, especially with Carrion Swift over here. He's a thief, who's a smartass, and so there were some elements of humor, and I just really liked this book. I would recommend it. I listened to the audio and read from the book, so I did kind of flip-flopping back and forth and some immersive reading. The audiobook is very well done. It's done in multiple voices, so we have the male character reads the male parts, female character reads female roles. They talk to each other. It was a good book. Like, I liked it. It was light fantasy, as in not like Dune. It was not so heavy and political and just beat yourself in the head. It was not like that. It was very much a good story with good characters, and I enjoyed it. So yeah, definitely gave it 4 stars. I would have given it 5, but there were some like cliches, and again, it could have used maybe not so long, but other than that, I greatly enjoyed it. It was my book of the month, hands down. So then on this side, I have the shorter reads that I did this month. So The Sleeper and the Spindle, Neil Gaiman. Think what you will about the author, but I am a person who can read a book and not allow the outside to influence me. I get that from, I took literary criticism in college, and Dr. Taylor drilled into our heads, you cannot consult the oracle. So what that means is that you can only read and judge a book by what's on the page. And so the author and whatever happens in his personal life, whatever he says in, the real world, it's not on the page, therefore I can't judge it. So I read books, and that's kind of how I separate and are able to enjoy books that have problematic authors, because Harry Potter's a fantastic story, but J.K. Rowling's a bigot. Neil Gaiman has been accused of some things that are deplorable, but we don't know what happened. And so I read because I want to read it. And I get it from the library, so it's not like my money's going to anybody. Sleeper and the Spindle was a fairy tale retelling. It kind of merged together several common fairy tale tropes and classic characters. The audiobook was done by the BBC as part of, I think their BBC radio, so it was fantastic. It had sound effects, a full cast doing the voices. It was great. It really was like listening to a movie. I liked how there was a lot of the sarcasm and the really British sarcasm, and Neil Gaiman in his writing his stories all have some sort of a dark twist to it, kind of like Coraline, kind of like, what's another one with a good dark twist? The ocean at the end of the lane, or the lane, yeah, the ocean at the end of the lane. Sandman especially have these little dark twists where you're expecting it to go one way, and then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, that person has no skin. So that was, actually that's another book we're about to get to in a second, but Sleeper and Spindle had stuff like that. I enjoyed it. It was a good little fairy tale. It was more young adult than children's for sure, because it did have some dark and some horror elements. The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy. This was very popular when it first came out. I remember it was like everywhere. And Barnes & Noble had gigantic displays of this book. And I was just like, oh, it's a pretty book, I guess. And I just walked right by it. But I picked it up and gave it a shot because I kept seeing quotes by it on Instagram and Facebook. People, make those little memes with like a quote, and I was like, that's some pretty profound stuff for a child's book. So I picked it up, and it reminded me a lot of like Winnie the Pooh, and how Winnie the Pooh had really good quotes in it that didn't just apply to children, but could apply to anybody. And so this book falls into that category. I really liked this quote. Always remember you matter, you're important, and you are loved, and you bring to this world things no one else can. I highly recommend this one. It was very good. Definitely read it to children. And I think some adults could definitely get some of the positive messages out of it. The Lost Words was a complete and utter waste of my time. Why did I read this? Like, why? So it's by Robert Macfarlane, and it was poetry meant for children, apparently. The poems sucked. They had it's bad. It was just bad poetry. No. Then I looked up the book and I was like, this book was horrible. Why? And so I look it up, and number one, it's got a freaking sequel. How this could have been so good that people paid money for a sequel, I don't know. But it's apparently based on the Children's Webster's Dictionary, and how from the first publishing to present day publishing, words have been cut out of the Children's Dictionary as being no longer important for children to know until they're like older, And so the poems all center around one of the cut words. And it just, no. Just forget that book ever exists. Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. I actually did kind of DNF this one. I just couldn't get into the characters. I just didn't care about them. The writing was beautiful. It was Jacqueline Woodson's typical writing. She's very lyrical, very full of imagery. There's nothing wrong with this book. It was not for me. It's not you. It's me. I did skim the ending, and it came out the way I thought it would. So I did not need to finish reading the book to know how it would end. Like I said, it was just not a book for me. Then I read Stephen Graham Jones's Mapping the Interior. Thank God. Stephen Graham Jones, one of my favorite horror writers, and if I'm in a reading slump, he always pulls me out. So this one was very interesting. This was a novella, so it was kind of short. It was I think around 150 pages. But it was about of course, Native Americans, modern day. This family has moved off the reservation. So the mother is working hard trying to make a place for her and her sons. And the two boys, one's 12, one's 9. The 12-year-old is, coming of age. So this is very much a coming of age story. The 9-year-old is an epileptic and starts to have seizures, and profound learning disabilities start to make themselves known, and just still slowly starts to just decline, and almost like a failure to thrive, even though you're 9 years old. And so the boy, though, he starts mapping the interior, or making a map of his house from top to bottom. Kids do weird things. But as he's crawling around under the house, because kids do weird things, he finds a chrysalis growing. Now, this chrysalis, he realizes, has something to do with his dead father, because he starts to have visions of his ghost father walking through the house and hanging around where this chrysalis is underneath the house. Then he starts noticing that there's a wound behind his little brother's ear. And he believes, and it's tied into some Native American mythology, that ghosts can feed off of the living to come back. And so the boy has to step up to save his brother, basically. But he also has to, in that point, he has to kill his father, essentially, even though his father is a ghost. It's wild. It pulls in and ties a lot of Native American mythology and religious beliefs of their religious system, and it was like, had elements of like Hellraiser. You could definitely tell, like, Stephen Graham Jones is a huge horror movie aficionado. Like, he's given talks about horror movies and the themes. They pop up in his other works, like My Heart is a Chainsaw, I Was a Teenage Slasher, etc. So, like, you can see where elements of, like, Hellraiser from Clive Barker, you can see where that's kind of influencing a little bit the story. And it just, it was so good. It was so good. I definitely recommend this one. This was a good one. Then we moved into some true crime, some historical true crime, actually. The Sinners All Bow was published in January, late January, and I had it on hold before the library even finished processing it, because this book sounded amazing. So what it is Kate Winkler Dawson, who's written a couple of other true crime books. She is working off of the manuscripts, court recordings, police interview reports. This book that was written by an investigative reporter named Elizabeth. Hold on. I think her name was Elizabeth Arnold. Yeah. And that's the investigative reporter from back then. But anyway, all of these things, and she started to apply modern forensic investigative techniques and testing to what was left from this murder case in 1832. Wild. Okay? So this murder case was also the basis of Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, which we know was about Hester Prynne, and she has a child out of wedlock, and so they make her wear a red A on her chest because you're not supposed to have babies out of wedlock, and they were Puritans, and oh my goodness, scandal. But this story, Sarah, that's my cat, sorry about that. Sarah Cornell is found hanging in a barn in December of 1832, Fall River, Massachusetts. Fall River also has more history and infamy. It's where Lizzie Borden killed her parents. So this town is kind of cursed because there's a few other major murders that have happened in Fall River, Massachusetts. They must put something in the water, I don't know. But it's definitely a hot spot for crime, apparently. But she's found hanging in this barn. And at first it's like, oh, poor thing committed suicide. Let us bury her, our sister. But then people start talking and they're like, dude, that was murder. Like, somebody killed this girl. And they started to do some little digging, and they find out she had a reputation, according to the community, the Methodists, the way they describe Methodists in this book, it's not like modern Methodism. In the 1800s, it was very cult-like, and it was a fringe religion that was just starting up, and so people did not, Methodist, boo-boo. But she is ostracized by the Methodists as a fallen woman, and they make up all these things about how she slept with all these people, she was trying to steal this one's husband, all this kind of crap. But it turns out that she was violently raped at a revival by Reverend Ephraim Avery, and she gets pregnant, and so she stands up to him, and she says, "You're going to pay child support." She gets up some nerve, she says, "You did this to me, you're going to pay child support." And then suddenly she turns up hanging in a barn. So this starts a whole murder trial, pulls all these witnesses, digs through all of this, her history and everything. It's also the first time in U.S. history where it began the whole victim blaming. It was her fault that she was killed. It was her fault that she was raped. It was her fault. And so that would never fly in modern court systems. And so they talk to modern prosecutors and they look at the transcripts and the court trials. It was fascinating. It was a very fascinating book. And you definitely there is closure at the end, I think, and we do figure out the best that we can 200 years later what happened to Sarah that night. And it was a really good book. I do recommend it, especially if you're into like true crime TV shows like Dateline Mystery. It was very much like that. I listened to the audiobook and it was like listening to my favorite murder podcast. It was so good. I do recommend, and I am going to look up more books by this author because I really enjoyed how she wrote this and how she broke apart the crime. The last book I read in February was called The Queen of the Cicadas. Man, I love this picture. So it was a horror novel about basically the Mexicano Candyman or Bloody Mary. And she is actually a god for women who have died in childbirth or shortly thereafter. And a young woman is murdered, and in her final moments, her final breath, she calls out to this god for vengeance. And so this god, gods, man, they are little pesky people. She starts a line of fate that connects all these different characters that were connected to the crime and also their descendants, because, revenge is a dish best served cold. So it was a good book. Like, I enjoyed it. It did, however, feel a bit like a debut novel. I think this was the third book published by V. Castro. And I would like to read one of her modern books because she's gaining quite popularity right now. And I'd like to read one of her more modern books and compare them, because this felt very debut, very like the author was starting to come into their style or their voice. And I want to see where she has evolved to. And I really liked it. I feel like she is definitely up there with like Silvia Moreno Garcia and Isabel Cananas as a voice in Latina horror. She had elements of body horror in this that were gross, but at the same time were just perfect for the scenario and for the story. I do recommend this one. It was a good one. It was a short read. I think it was under 300 pages. There were a lot of characters to keep track of. That is one thing. There were a lot of characters to keep track of, and there were a couple of different timelines going on. So if you're just like a surface entertainment reader, maybe not. You kind of had to think a little bit with this one and follow the different stories and the different characters to see the bigger picture of what this god was doing. I really enjoyed when the god spoke in the story. It sounded like a god, and V. Castro, this was a cool one. Here, the quote I chose from it Gods are things of fiction, dusty artifacts preserved behind glass, mere characters created by early civilizations to explain their world. Science says we do not exist. But next time you hear that scratch or howl or have a sense of unease, it is not science in the room. Oh, it was so good. It really was good. I do recommend it. It was just a good little horror story. So those were the 8 books I read this month. Definitely recommend Quicksilver, and basically I recommend these 4. So Quicksilver, Mapping the Interior, The Sinners All Bow, and Queen of the Cicadas. They were fantastic. I really enjoyed reading these ones. The books that I've chosen to start off March are, drumroll, I am currently reading Scythe and Sparrow, the 3rd book in the Ruinous Love trilogy, which is one of my favorite book series. And then also The Resurrectionist by A. Ray Dunlap. So these are my 2 books that I'm starting off in March. So I will definitely have reviews for those at the end of the month. So that is February. Thank you so much for listening to my little book review rants. Reviews, I guess. Sorry if I spoiled, but that's kind of the risk you take when you read books, watch book reviews. So yeah, that was February. Thank you so much and happy reading.